Tonight on First Tuesday.
There isn't a telephone anywhere in the world that we couldn't tap.
We investigate whether MI5's freelance agents are out of democratic control.
I'm absolutely certain that many of the private security firms now being used, probably by our own security services, are being used to bypass that process, not to remain within it.
Good evening and welcome. Tonight's First Tuesday is a film that will almost certainly never be repeated on British television, because within a few weeks it will be illegal to transmit it. Within a few weeks we won't be allowed to tell you if your private conversations are being listened to legally or illegally by the state. By then, the new Official Secrets Act will be in place, and it'll be an offence to report on the activities of MI5 in the fields of bugging, telephone tapping and burglary. Even if MI5 agents break the law of the land, it cannot be reported. Even if it's in the public interest to report such misdemeanours, that will not constitute a defence. Tonight's film is not about an MI5 agent. It is about a freelance Buggist and telephone tapper who claims to have worked on occasion on subcontracts for MI5, a freelance operator doing illegal work which MI5 can deny all knowledge of, what's known in the business as a cutout. When that happens, you have, as Democrats leader Paddy Ashton just observed, a system that bypasses all democratic controls, that isn't accountable to Parliament or anyone else. The telephone tapper in question is David Coghlan, an ex-army man who makes his living primarily in the booming market of private surveillance. For anyone who's ever wondered if their phone could be tapped, his reconstructions, with certain key elements omitted, are an unsettling reminder of how fragile privacy and civil liberty can be. His claims to have worked on behalf of the security service bring us to the fringes of a murky world, and when that work is illegal, we see it as a matter of public interest. David Coghlan is the first such freelance to speak out about his trade. As the law changes, he may also be the last. He is the Buggist.
This man makes his living out of prying into other people's secrets. His targets could be anyone: businessmen, political activists, trade unions, pressure groups, or just ordinary members of the public, unsuspecting and unaware that their private meetings and conversations can be penetrated by a high-tech mercenary. He's a man who works at the edge of the law. His specialized services have been hired by private companies, foreign governments, embassies, even, he claims, by Britain's security service, MI5. David Coghlan is a freelance Buggist and professional telephone tapper at the top of his highly secretive profession. But for him, an assignment to eavesdrop on other people's private lives is not so much snooping, more just a technical challenge.
I've always been fascinated by the ways of obtaining sound. I'm not really interested in what people are saying and what's coming over on the recording. As long as it's a good recording, I mean, that's all I'm really interested in. I'm not really interested in what people's business is. There isn't a telephone anywhere in the world that we couldn't tap.
In the specific world of the telephone, in other words, of handling telephones, I would rate him one of the best. David Coghlan is also a man who's got a lot of bottle. He's not afraid. Most technical people, most employees of the post office have the technical ability to bug a telephone illegally. 98% of them, perhaps much higher, are petrified to do so. David is cold-nerved. He doesn't seem to have any nerves. So he could go and open a box in the middle of the street, set up his tent, and probably even out-talk post office investigator who would find him. That's the skill of the man who can do it.
It was in the army 20 years ago that David Coghlan's career as a buggist began. His skill in electronics was soon noticed by certain special units.
Well, at one time I'd worked with the Intelligence Corps. I'd also worked with certain departments within the SAS. I attended many technical courses which involved surveillance equipment and counter-surveillance.
The Army School of Intelligence at Templar Barracks, Ashford in Kent. A former military intelligence officer who trained there is Captain Fred Holroyd.
The courses covered surveillance, exercises mounted from here, familiarisation with weapons, writing reports, understanding how the intelligence cycle worked, dealing with all aspects, burglary, surveillance, all aspects of operational training used in intelligence.
Back in Civvy Street, Coghlan used his Army intelligence training to set up as a bugging and debugging expert.
Well, I suppose you could say that the trade I learnt in the Army, which was basically electronics, which concerned itself with surveillance equipment, I developed and used in civilian life.
To show us the tricks of his trade, we asked David Coghlan to demonstrate how, with the owner's permission, he would tap the phone and bug the rooms of an average terraced house.
First of all, we need to identify the line. So we go to a call box and dial the number and use a special device to put a tone onto the line. Then we go to the street junction box, and with a probe we can pick up the tone which would be on the target line. It takes just a few seconds to attach the bug to the line. Which picks up any conversation and transmits them to a nearby receiver.
Would that be okay?
Yeah, that's fine. That gives us time to nip down the shops. Yeah, I'll see you then. If we're not in, just come straight in. Ta-da.
The phone call was to fix up a meeting. So while the residents are out, how would Coghlan bug the meeting room?
A sophisticated configuration would be to use a spike mic. This is a contact mic with a metal spike fixed to it, and it's used by, first of all, drilling a hole into the wall. And any conversation taking place on the other side of the wall will vibrate against it and continue through the spike and then into the microphone.
Coghlan's bugging, however, doesn't stop at the outside. He's been trained by the Army in methods of entry.
I can pick a lot of locks. I mean, sometimes it takes a long time, but it's possible to actually pick most of the locks or get around them in some way or another. If you can get into the area in which you want to monitor, you can use, say, a radio bug. And a radio bug is just a small radio transmitter, and is what the majority of people visualise when you mention bugs. And these can be quite small.
Good comments on what he's done. Where do we go from here?
It's got to be something public, isn't it? It's not just the three of us doing it. Got to get some people involved. It's got to get public exposure, isn't it? It's got to. We can't just sit on this.
So what kind of campaign can we mount based on these points?
Well, a bit more publicity, I think.
The only laws that Coghlan breaks when he plants a bug are trespass and transmitting without a licence. Though banned in many countries, bugging is not illegal in Britain. But the Interception of Communications Act, 1985, outlaws private phone tapping altogether. Maximum sentence, 2 years in jail. But last year, more than 450 telephones in Britain were tapped perfectly legally by British Telecom themselves. Official interception for the police, customs and security services is coordinated here at British Telecom's Gresham Street headquarters in the City of London. A group of 63 engineers and supervisors, known to colleagues as secret squirrels, travel to local exchanges to place the taps. Our biggest intelligence organisation, GCHQ, has the capacity to monitor all Britain's international satellite telephone calls. In the centre of London too, GCHQ is listening in from its diplomatic monitoring station high above Earl's Court. Its aerials tuned in to the signals traffic from London's embassies. The 1985 Act stipulates that a Secretary of State must issue a warrant for every official telephone tap. It also established a tribunal of judges to hear complaints from members of the public, investigate alleged abuse and award compensation. But how well does it work in practice? One person who did complain was Tony Miller, an executive of the National Union of Teachers. In the middle of the 1987 teachers' strike, his suspicions were aroused at the end of a phone call.
I was about to put the phone down and leave it for a while to try again later, when I heard a playback of the part of the interview that I'd just given to the reporter. Now, this interview on the tape was about a 15 to 16 second section, which was on a loop and continued to repeat itself until I got tired of listening. There's no doubt at all in my mind that my phone was tapped, and maybe still is, for all I know. I went to see my union solicitor, who prepared a case for the Interception of Communications Tribunal and submitted that. The result was a letter that I had from the tribunal, which says that they were satisfied that there had been no contravention of sections 2 to 5 of the Interception of Communications Act 1985 in relation to a relevant warrant or relevant certificate. Now, that leaves me with no confidence, sadly, that my phone was not authorised to be tapped, because there's nothing in there that says definitely that it was or wasn't.
If we have a suspicion, we write to the Commission, and all it has to, the Tribunal, all it has to do is assure itself that this was done under some warrant. It doesn't give causes or reasons. Now, the question is, why are you tapping the phone of a teacher who's involved in teachers' union business? Is that what national security is about?
Whatever the law says, anyone can buy bugging and phone tapping equipment. It's freely available by mail order catalogue. Now it's moving into the high street too. Shops like these sell every kind of electronic surveillance device, ranging in price from £5 to thousands of pounds. In the last few years, it's grown into an £8 million a year business. Retailers report there's still plenty of room for expansion.
Our company is growing at 100% per year. The industry itself is essentially European rather than UK, but it's certainly expanding very, very quickly. Nowadays we're supplying large companies, insurance companies, banks, anybody that needs to uncover what is very often fraudulent activity. If you use some of the products that we manufacture, they are very, very flexible, they're very small, they are very, very discreet. For example, this is an ordinary pen. It's the sort of thing that you would see in any office, but in actual fact it contains a quartz-controlled ultra-high-frequency transmitter. If this were left anywhere in this office, one could very clearly hear, perhaps 200, 300, 400 yards away, exactly what is being said. Certain of our products do infringe some areas of law. That pen that I illustrated, for example, in use would contravene the Wireless Telegraphy Act. Morality is a question of opinion, and that depends at where you stand at the time. The vast majority of our equipment is used for the prevention of fraud, the detection of fraud, and it really is, at the end of the day, a question of does the end justify the means?
My prime skill is to use bugging devices to install microphones into a meeting room, on the end of the wires, put recording equipment. A lot of people do it. It's a wide range of businesses, whoever the targets may be.
Moving now on to speech intercepts.
To cope with the threat from Buggist like Coghlan, another growth industry, counter-surveillance or debugging. Every month, this debugging company, AudioTel, runs courses for businessmen anxious to protect their secrets from electronic industrial espionage.
Is use of the cordless telephone.
The practical part of the £170 a day seminar, a game of Hunt the Bug.
The microphone has not been obscured, or shouldn't be obscured too much. So it's now 10 minutes past 2, thereabouts. Of course, you have the advantage of knowing that there is a device here and what it looks like. In a real situation, you don't know whether there is a device, and of course you don't know how many. This exercise is illustrating how easy it is to install an eavesdropping device, even when you are not an expert. Our demonstration shows that when it comes to finding a device, it is extremely difficult to do that, even with a large group of people, without the aid of special search equipment. I think you're all grinding to a halt. OK, let me show you. And there we are, there's a transmitter.
The easy way to pinpoint a hidden device, if you can afford it, is this £2,000 debugging machine. But a gadget like this doesn't worry an expert like David Coghlan.
Well, I can make bugs undetectable. We can disguise the modes of transmission. These things can be made quite small, even less than the size of a sugar cube. They can also be extremely complex and employ sophisticated radio transmission techniques.
This specialised bugging equipment, custom-built by Coghlan, sells to select clients around the world.
Do you ever do any work for the South African government?
Yeah, South Africans, I've sold them equipment at times, little bits and pieces that they've been interested in. They're fairly good customers, yeah.
Even the tightest security measures are no match for David Coghlan's state-of-the-art surveillance skills.
OK, well, when we've done that, we should include those, certainly in the planning application.
Without going anywhere near the target area, can turn the telephone into quite an efficient bug. All the eavesdropper has to do to make use of the telephone microphone is to get across a little gap in the gravity switch, and he does this by sending a high-powered radio signal from his piece of equipment attached to the line, down the line, into the house and into the telephone. All the operating equipment would be fitted outside on the external line. The conversations could actually be monitored from a van, as near as possible to the telephone. This is a technique known as radio frequency flooding.
It's a method of activating a telephone to bug a room by remote control.
Not in totality, no.
So how do we keep that out of the press?
Bribery. It's actually been...
With techniques like this, David Coghlan's services are highly prized in the business world, both for bugging and debugging, and sometimes, he claims, for some unexpected clients.
Well, one time I was asked to actually debug some offices for British Telecom management. That was actually in the big post office tower. They thought that their employees attached something to their telephones, and they wanted an independent person to check that out.
Unknown to British Telecom, one of their own engineers, David Richards, later worked as Coghlan's phone-tapping assistant.
I worked for British Telecom for 21 years. What I was used to doing was climbing telegraph poles. I didn't think that people were bugged and tapped like you read in the newspapers. But there was obviously a lot of it going on. I met David Coghlan some 10 years before. He eventually let me into the fact that he was tapping telephone lines for government circles, and he would show me the equipment that he did it with. First of all, he started not by saying he was tapping phones, he was more concerned with debugging equipment, embassies and places like that. Showing me the equipment that he used. Pretty good stuff. I'd never seen anything like it. I mean, at one time I felt that if you weren't being tapped and you lived in London, you were nobody.
Here in London's embassy land, Coghlan found a constant source of work. Foreign governments hired him to debug their embassies and sometimes to bug selected targets.
It's mostly on their own people, you know, checking that they're not double agents, something like that.
In 1983, David Coghlan was hired by an Arab embassy to tap the line of a London arms dealer with customers in Syria. What he learned from the intercepts surprised him.
They concerned the latest American helicopters fitted with the latest technology that they had. We contacted the American embassy in London, who got a man over from Washington, and we had a talk with him about it.
And what did he say about it? Was he interested?
He was very interested, but actually they knew all about it. They knew that it was a deal which actually I think the CIA had initiated, because it was a backdoor deal.
The Seychelles Islands in the Indian Ocean, a tourist paradise. But since 1977, its Marxist government has dealt ruthlessly with political opponents. Exiled dissidents have found asylum here in London. Their demonstrations a constant thorn in the side of the government back home. The Seychelles government suspected that the London dissidents under the leadership of this man, Gerard Poirot, were planning an armed coup. So the exiled opposition groups in London became the target of a long-running surveillance operation. Private meetings in this West London hotel were bugged by Coghlan. To get in, he used an attractive woman as a decoy.
The hotel porter, I was impressed with her, opened the door, let her arrange the flowers while we planted bugging devices inside the hotel room.
Poirot's restaurant meetings were just as easily penetrated.
Nobody noticed there's an extra waiter who's going to come and change the ashtray, or who's going to come and put a pepper pot on the table or something like that.
But this wasn't enough. In May 1985, the surveillance operation on Gerard Poirot was stepped up. Here in suburban Edgware, his home became a prime target. But it was too risky to approach, so Coghlan decided to tap his telephone line half a mile away.
Yes, the lines from the house at Green Court Avenue run underground and come up in this green box here. And we actually intercepted the lines in this green box. And using the spare wires that go up that telegraph pole, fed the tapped calls into that wire, and using a transmitting device, beamed the information to a house a couple of roads away.
The next stage of the job was to tap the line of another Seychelles dissident leader, Edmond Camille, who lived just a few streets away. Suspicious of his private phone, Camille used a nearby coin box for safety.
The telephone box, and you can see the telephone box there. The pole further up there, we attached a transmitter to that pole, which was connected to the line of the house there.
So now Coghlan and Richards had 3 taps in operation.
At one time we had 3 transmitters going at 3 different points in the area. There was his friend's house, his own house, and a coin box.
The Seychelles government even bought and sold a £60,000 house as a listening post.
Better to use a house because, of course, you've got this ready-made power available. You don't have to use batteries. You're not leaving cars around on the street, which would be noticed. So with the house, everything was self-contained.
For 3 months, the tapes from the phone taps were regularly rushed back to the Seychelles government by air. Then, suddenly, on November the 29th, 1985, the surveillance ended in tragedy.
Scotland Yard's anti-terrorist squad are investigating the killing of a man at Edgware in London. Police say they're treating the shooting of Mr. Gerard Warrow as a political murder.
Warrow's assassin has never been found to this day.
I can feel terribly guilty about it if I think that that taping was anything to do with the man's murder. There's nothing, I don't think, in this life that would make you be part of the killing of another person. There's no money or excitement that can justify that. So I have mixed feelings. I feel better on days when I think that, no, it was something that was probably going to happen to him, and it did.
Well, of course, I'd wished I'd never done it. And as I say, if we'd have known that violence would have been used, we would have not started doing it, and at any time we would have stopped.
The police murder hunt was conducted by the anti-terrorist squad. Their discovery of telephone tapping equipment led them to Coghlan and Richards, who were arrested and put on trial at the Old Bailey. During the court case, disturbing allegations were to emerge about the relationship between British officialdom and private Buggists. In February 1987, at the Old Bailey, the prosecution accepted that Coghlan and Richards had played no part in the Edgware murder. The verdict, guilty of minor charges connected with telephone tapping. But court evidence raised a number of questions about the involvement of official bodies. 1. The Special Branch. The police admitted they had removed one of Coughlan's phone taps 3 months before Warrow's assassination. It was only after the murder that they traced the bug to Coghlan and Richards.
The Special Branch definitely knew we were down at Edgware because the equipment was removed by them months before the man was killed. And that annoys me because if there had have been anything untoward with the operation or anything like that, if they'd have stepped in then, probably the man would be alive today.
Next, the anti-terrorist squad stated in court that Coghlan had helped the police in the past.
Yeah, at one stage, we actually helped the anti-terrorist squad, the very people that arrested us.
It concerned this suspected Libyan terrorist, Ali El Gihor. Charged with bombing offences in 1984, he was released on bail only to be murdered. Later, Coghlan was listening in to 2 Iranians on a routine bugging job.
And the name of the murdered man, Ali El Gihor, came up. We contacted the anti-terrorist squad because of this. And they, at the time, asked us to carry on monitoring these meetings and report back to them.
3. The Foreign Office. The defendants claimed in court that officials at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office were aware of the Edgware surveillance operation and had received regular reports based on it from the Seychelles government.
The judge in court asked or sent round a message to the Foreign Office and asked what they knew of this operation. And they said they couldn't confirm or deny that they were involved. which is the usual thing they would say.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I think all of us felt let down. I mean, they could have, I wouldn't say cleared us, but really watered down the case that the police had against us, you know.
4. The security services. Coghlan stated in court that he had carried out freelance bugging and phone tapping for Britain's security service, MI5. MI5 is charged with protecting national security against espionage, terrorism and subversion. From its operations centre in Curzon Street, Mayfair, MI5 runs a surveillance network that spreads throughout the country. Its surveillance teams, known as the Watchers, are coordinated here in the Euston Tower. For street tailing work, they keep cars in underground garages, like this one in the West End. MI5's bugging equipment is made by the Intelligence Service's Technical Research Facility at the Aldermaston Atomic Weapons Establishment and at Martlesham Heath near Ipswich by the microchip experts of British Telecom's R12 department. MI5's bugs are tested at the Home Office Scientific Research Laboratory just outside St Albans in Hertfordshire. The security service's alleged choice of targets for bugging and tapping has often been called into question.
The phone calls of trade unionists in pay negotiations at Ford were tapped. The members of the National Council of Civil Liberties had their phones tapped, and members of CND had their phones tapped, all in the interests of something called national security. Now, the powers of the state to determine what national security is are unlimited.
Phone tapping for MI5 is carried out by British Telecom at local exchanges. Intercepted calls are relayed back to be recorded in a special British Telecom room at Curzon Street. But why should an organisation like MI5 need to use freelance buggists?
They would certainly use ex-department men, ex-police officers who'd shown a skill in a particular field but had been lost to them in their normal duties because they've retired. Well, that man is still willing, he still wants to earn a living. Why not use him, if you can trust him? So these people have retired out, set up a little commercial company of their own, and they're useful as a cutout.
But it's the legality of it that concerns Democrats leader Paddy Ashdown.
What worries me is that those sanctions which might be given in respect of the security services will then not include private freelance operations, maybe done with a nod and a wink.
Okay.
I believe that this mechanism has been used to bypass democratic political control of the security services, that the proper clearances that are sought for security service operations have not been sought for these, that they've been used in a way which would make their operations deniable, in other words, without any kind of accountability. And in some cases, the law is clearly broken. Civil liberties in Britain are clearly infringed in a way which I think is very dangerous.
In 1983, at Sizewell, David Coghlan became involved in a controversial surveillance operation, which was targeted on environmental pressure groups. A year-long inquiry into the building of a new reactor at the East Anglian site drew anti-nuclear protesters from all over Britain, marching and demonstrating against the proposed expansion of the government's nuclear power programme. They didn't know it, but they were being bugged.
Well, I rigged up the people who mixed with the protesters at Sizewell. It was the job of these agents to manoeuvre themselves into specific groups and obtain recordings or transmissions of specific conversations. But what you have to realise is that we were told that these people were sinister subversives who were controlled from behind the Iron Curtain and not legitimate protesters who were worried about the building of a power station.
We had semi-private meetings where we planned our opposition, and they were held all around the region in village halls, church halls, people's homes, offices, you name it, we had a meeting in it.
We didn't actually ever stop anybody coming, but we were expecting them to be delegates or representatives of local environmental groups. But there was no security as such. The doors were not closed.
They were trying to infiltrate as protesters. They just looked like protesters. They spoke like the protesters here.
dressed like them.
There were one or two people that we felt weren't quite our sort of campaigners.
Ordinary citizens going about their ordinary legal daily business were subject to surveillance, including audio surveillance, in a way which I think is very sinister and I believe may well have been included, actually breaking the law.
If they were bugging us and bugging quite legitimate people who are simply environmentalists concerned about an environmental development, I really don't know now who it's not legitimate to bug.
The surveillance was run from the London offices of Zeus Security Consultants Limited. This confidential report shows the object of the operation was to investigate the protesters' connections with the media and their political leanings. Day-to-day work was subcontracted out via another detective agency to local private investigator Victor Norris, a man with previous convictions for child sexual abuse.
Those who were involved in this surveillance, some of them themselves, had criminal records. Now, I don't believe that that is an issue which we can pass over lightly.
The parent company of Zeus Security Consultants was Zeus Security Limited. Its board then included Peter Hamilton, MBE, a former military intelligence officer, Major General Sir Philip Ward, and Lord Chalfont, now Deputy Chairman of the Independent Broadcasting Authority. Later in 1983, Sir Philip Ward and Lord Chalfont resigned from Zeus. Peter Hamilton has since acknowledged he organised the Sizewell operation. He denies it was for Whitehall, but refuses to name his client.
Now, we don't know who the ultimate client was. I've no reason to suspect it was the government, and the Central Electricity Generating Board has specifically denied that it was them.
And I think Zeus Security were working for the security services.
Which one?
Well, again, I think Zeus were working for MI5 at the time.
What led you to believe that they were working for MI5? Did they say that? Did the people from Zeus say that they were?
Yes, it was mentioned that that Zeus were working for MI5, yes.
Well, that is new information, and I think doubly worrying, because why should the security services get involved with acting on surveillance, mounting surveillance on citizens who are going about their daily business in a legal fashion and exercising their citizens' rights to put their views before a public inquiry? If that is so, I think that adds a new dimension to this, which makes it extremely worrying.
David Coghlan is not the only freelancer who claims to have worked for MI5. Ex-private detective Gary Murray.
I believe that numerous private detective and security agencies have been used by the security service as a cutout. If anything goes wrong, they're not involved. 10:30 in the evening, I received a telephone call from a man who said his name was David. He identified, or stated on the telephone, that he was from the Ministry of Defence, and he mentioned the name of someone that I knew in the intelligence world, and asked if we could meet. I was given a phone number, London number. This was followed by a further 2 numbers, and I do know that one of the numbers was in fact connected to Curzon Street, the Ministry of Defence, Curzon Street. I took photographs for them, made tape recordings, I watched people, I collected information, general information, about individuals' activities, future plans, general things like this, just general investigative work.
The Security Service Bill, soon to become law, will compel MI5 to obtain warrants for bugging and burglary, and it will provide a tribunal to investigate complaints from the public. But how will this new law affect freelance operations?
They'll completely dodge all the mechanisms for democratic control and accountability. And if those mechanisms are dodged, the public will never have a right to know.
Sandown Park Exhibition Centre, Surrey. Last November, visitors from both the official and private surveillance worlds met at the Covert and Operational Procurement Exhibition, COPEX 88, a major event in the intelligence world's calendar. It's a showcase for international bugging equipment. Advertised as a strictly private event, Admittance is by warrant cards, official ID material, or special invitation only. Security is tight, cameras supposedly forbidden. Among the visitors, police and customs men, SAS members, and bugging experts like David Coghlan. On display, there's everything for the well-equipped commando. Other stallholders are eager to sell the latest surveillance equipment, some of it only recently declassified.
Video recorder that will be monitoring the suspect.
Visitors can also inspect bugging equipment of all kinds, as well as the latest developments in telephone tapping.
Telephone monitoring device. So this is a rack for 10 lines. So you're able to monitor 10 different telephones simultaneously.
At the end of the day, the official and private surveillance experts wander off to talk shop at the bar. The Copex exhibition happens only once a year. A more regular and more intimate meeting place for the surveillance and security business is this Knightsbridge Club.
There's a club in London called the Special Forces Club, and you get a lot of ex-security services and ex-foreign office people in there, ex-army people, and I suppose a lot of it, that's a typical example of a place where jobs are discussed.
Do you go to the Special Forces Club yourself?
Yeah, I've been in a few times, yes.
Liverpool, 1982. The militant tendency was on the path to victory in the city council elections. Their campaign was planned from this fortified building, the Militant Centre. It was another challenge for Dave Coghlan, working, he claims, for MI5.
As I understand it, the meetings of the militant tendency in Liverpool had been infiltrated by agents from the security service, and they were actually barred from some of the inner meetings, and I became involved with other people in trying to obtain conversations, recordings of conversations that took place there.
Coghlan tackled the problem with a spike mic, drilled into the wall under cover of darkness.
The contact microphone was actually connected to a radio transmitter, a coded one, and that transmitted to, can you see that green area at the back? That would actually transmit to there, 300 or 400 yards away, to a vehicle.
I came along here one night with Mr. Coghlan, a Sunday night, very wet. We wandered down the back and was looking for a site to put some microphones into a window frame. My job was to see if there was anywhere where we could possibly hang a transmitter on a telegraph pole. There was no site available for that.
Can you just show us where you put it in the wall? Right.
It was actually around this area here somewhere. Around this area here.
I believe it's an affront. I think that in those circumstances, you know, nothing is sacred under those circumstances. And in that way, you know, it is a shock to anybody who hears it.
Coghlan claims he was working for an anonymous subcontractor, working in turn for MI5.
Well,
Their job is to monitor the activities of activists. So people like militant tendency, like Greenpeace, like NCCL, those sort of people.
But it wasn't just activists and pressure groups that David Coghlan claims he's bugged for MI5. His most intriguing allegation centres on an apparent spy investigation carried out here in Helensburgh, Scotland, in 1981. Just beyond the town, there's a series of nuclear bases that support Britain's deterrent. Like Coolport, Polaris missile store and loading point for the Navy's nuclear submarines. At Faslane, 2 miles from Helensburgh, is the Polaris fleet's home base. And high in the nearby mountains, the Glendouglas NATO arms dump. Helensburgh is home to many naval officers and military technicians. Coghlan claims he was sent there to bug a regular visitor to the town, who on arrival would telephone his contact from this coin box.
I fitted a drop-in device, which is literally dropped into the microphone end of the telephone handset. That gave information on who was going to meet in a pub or a flat or hotel. The suggestion was that paperwork was changing hands and indications that it may have been something to do with the military bases in this area. On one occasion they said that they'd like to grab hold of the papers, but it may mess up the operation. They had a tail on a vehicle that he was using. We had put a surveillance device inside that vehicle.
The visitor's contact lived in a flat on the outskirts of Helensburgh. At the turn of the 1980s, that flat was rented out to a number of overseas military personnel. Coughlan's assignment was to bug the flat and install microphones in the garden around it.
I'd previously put a probe microphone into the window frame to enable them to hear what was being said. There was also occasions where they would talk in the grounds of the flat, and we'd put transmitting devices in the grounds.
So they were being bugged while they were walking through the garden as well as in the flat?
They were being listened to while they were walking through the grounds, yes. The bugging devices we used on the flat was of limited range, so we fitted a repeater unit which boosted those signals, and that repeater unit was situated on this pole here.
That pole was half a mile from the contact's flat.
My job was to connect a pair of wires to the top of the pole over there. That was on the first occasion. Came along the first time with David, went, asked the people at the bungalow could we go into the back garden to work on the pole.
The radio repeater booster unit sent the signals on to a hotel which is just down the road there, and also to a vehicle which was driving around the area. They monitored transmissions from our equipment. I should think they were from the security services.
Let me be clear. There are cases where national security must be protected and the laws of the land have to be infringed in order to do that. But that can only happen where there is a specific sanction from the senior politician, that is the Home Secretary, involved. He is the person who is accountable for that. I don't object to that as a principle, but I'm absolutely certain that many of the private security firms now being used, probably by our own security services, are being used to bypass that process, not to remain within it. The new secrets bill will actually make it almost impossible, indeed illegal, ever to even know or seek to know about these operations. So I fear things will not get better, they will get immeasurably worse. And we must have a system so that the private security services that operate in this murky world in frequently illegal manners can actually be brought under a proper system of control.
I think it's in the public interest to know what goes on.
This sort of work is going on all the time, whether it's done by private people or agencies of the state. So somebody's got to do it.
Even as we were completing this film, Coghlan kept an appointment at Waterloo Station. It was to discuss his next freelance bugging operation.
The sort of operation David Coghlan claims to have been involved in raises serious questions about MI5. It's always been this government's policy not to comment on matters of national security, but our programme has prompted Democrats leader Paddy Ashdown to ask Mrs Thatcher on this occasion, as he put it, not to shelter behind the traditional stock answer on these matters. In a letter to the Prime Minister, Mr Ashdown has asked for a thorough inquiry into the investigation of the Sizewell protesters and into the allegations made by David Coghlan. And, if the law allows, we'll keep you posted. Until next month, good night.